April 30th, 2021 to 11:47 p.m. David Ronald stared at the blood on his hands. His brother Benjamin lay motionless on the bedroom floor, the kitchen knife still lodged in his chest. Karen's screams echoed through their Vancouver penthouse as red and blue police lights began to flash through the fog outside. "He's my brother," David whispered as the officers handcuffed him. "My own brother, in my bed." 20 minutes earlier, David had come home early from his oil rig rotation in the North Sea. Now he was being led away in handcuffs while paramedics rushed to save his dying brother. He never meant to kill Benjamin. But finding your wife in bed with your only sibling has a way of changing everything. The events that led to this tragic incident started 3 months ago. But first, let's meet the Ronalds. David Ronald, 35, known in the oil industry as the Fixer, the man companies called when offshore operations went wrong. His expertise in crisis management made him one of the highest-paid specialists in the North Sea. But success came at a price. Every emergency meant another missed anniversary, another canceled holiday, another strain on his marriage. David grew up raising his younger brother Benjamin after their parents died in a car crash. He worked 3 jobs to put Benjamin through college, postponing his own dreams until his brother was settled. Even now, at the height of his career, he sent money home to help with Benjamin's struggling business ventures. The irony? All those years saving others' lives at sea couldn't prepare him for the disaster waiting at home. Karen Ronald, 31. From the outside, Karen lived an enviable life. Wife to a successful engineer, owner of one of Vancouver's most prestigious art galleries, her Instagram feed was a carefully curated display of charity galas and exotic vacations. But the reality was different. Long nights alone in their empty penthouse, dinner parties where she had to explain yet another of David's absences, holidays spent tracking offshore emergencies on her phone. She'd met David at a gallery opening 6 years ago. His intensity, his devotion to family, his quiet strength, everything about him seemed perfect. What she hadn't understood then was how that same devotion would leave her feeling like a ghost in her own marriage. Benjamin Ronald, 32. The charming younger brother with the perfect smile and empty bank account. While David built his career one crisis at a time, Benjamin built a reputation as Vancouver's most promising entrepreneur. Promising, but never quite delivering. His latest venture, a tech startup promising to revolutionize cryptocurrency trading, was following the familiar pattern: big promises, investor meetings, and mounting debts. But Benjamin had one talent his brother lacked. He knew how to be there. When Karen's gallery faced financial troubles, he stepped in with connections. When she spent another Christmas alone, he brought champagne and takeout. When she cried about the growing distance in her marriage, he listened. What no one knew was that Benjamin had been watching, waiting, planning. David's long absences weren't just destroying his marriage, they were creating an opportunity Benjamin had every intention of taking. Their lives moved in a delicate triangle. David working endless rotations to maintain their lifestyle, Karen building her gallery's reputation while hiding her loneliness, and Benjamin orbiting ever closer, offering comfort while harboring his own agenda. By April 2021, the triangle had become too fragile, too charged with unspoken resentments and dangerous attractions. Something had to break, and on April 30th, everything did. The Ronald brothers learned about loss early. On a rainy Vancouver night in 1998, a drunk driver took their parents' lives, leaving 13-year-old David to become both brother and father to 10-year-old Benjamin. Their aunt, Clara, took them in, but it was David who stayed up helping Benjamin with homework, David who worked after school at the local garage to buy Benjamin's soccer gear, David who promised their parents ghosts that he would keep his little brother safe. That promise shaped David's entire life. He abandoned his dream of attending art school, taking vocational courses in engineering instead. The oil industry paid well, and every paycheck meant Benjamin could stay in the best schools. When Benjamin wanted to attend business school in Toronto, David took the most dangerous offshore assignments for the bonus pay. Their aunt called him a martyr. Benjamin called him the best brother anyone could have. David called it doing what needed to be done. But success and sacrifice drew the brothers down different paths. While David learned to manage crisis after crisis on the oil rigs, Developing the stern personality that earned him the nickname The Fixer, Benjamin grew into his role as the family charmer. He breezed through business school on charisma more than grades, leaving a trail of admirers and unpaid debts. David paid those too, never questioning his brother's explanations or excuses. Family was family. Karen entered their lives like a burst of color in a grayscale world. She'd newly arrived from Montreal in 2015, determined to make her mark on Vancouver's art scene. Her gallery opening drew Vancouver's elite, but it was the tall, serious man studying a contemporary piece who caught her attention. David didn't try to impress her with art knowledge like the others. Instead, he asked her why she chose to display this particular artist's pain so prominently. Their courtship was intense and brief. Karen saw in David a depth that her artistic circles lacked, while David discovered the passion for art he'd buried since his parents' death. They married within a year, and for a while, their differences complemented each other perfectly. Her spontaneity pulled him away from endless work. His stability gave her the freedom to take risks with the gallery. Benjamin stood as best man at their wedding, giving a toast that made everyone cry with stories of David's sacrifices. What no one noticed was how his eyes lingered on Karen during the first dance, or how he'd already begun calculating the angles of his next move. The first cracks appeared gradually. David's work took him away more frequently as his reputation grew. Karen's gallery flourished, but each success felt hollow without her husband there to share it. Benjamin, meanwhile, launched venture after failed venture, each time turning to David for bailouts that stretched the couple's finances. Then came the pandemic in 2020. As the world locked down, Karen's gallery struggled. David's work became more crucial than ever as oil companies fought to maintain production under impossible conditions. He spent 8 months straight on various rigs, coming home only to face quarantine before the next rotation. The distance between husband and wife grew from a crack to a chasm. Benjamin saw his chance. His latest cryptocurrency venture was failing. His investors were asking questions, and he needed both money and a distraction. In Karen, he saw both. She was lonely, vulnerable, and most importantly, had access to David's accounts. What began as innocent dinner company slowly evolved into lingering touches and meaningful glances. Benjamin played his role perfectly. The attentive brother-in-law, the shoulder to cry on, the man who was there while his brother was not. By early 2021, the stage was set for tragedy. David was thousands of miles away. Karen was trapped in an empty life of virtual gallery tours and frozen bank accounts, and Benjamin had positioned himself as her savior. All it would take was one moment of weakness, one line crossed, one betrayal, to set in motion events that would destroy them all. That moment came on a rainy night in March, when Benjamin brought over a bottle of wine to console Karen after another canceled visit from David. The same wine they would be drinking on April 30th, when David finally came home. March 15, 2021 marked Karen's third virtual gallery opening of the year. The event was a success by pandemic standards, but the emptiness of the gallery echoed her personal void. David had promised to watch the live stream from his oil rig, but an emergency maintenance situation kept him away. Again. That night, as Karen sat alone in her office counting online sales, Benjamin appeared with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of aged Bordeaux. "You shouldn't celebrate alone," he said, his smile carrying the warmth she'd been missing. They sat on the gallery floor, surrounded by modern art installations, sharing stories and wine until the bottle was empty. "Remember when David used to paint?" Benjamin asked, studying a contemporary piece on the wall. "He was good. Really good. But after our parents died..." He let the sentence hang, heavy with unspoken understanding. Karen nodded, the wine loosening her usual guard. "He never told me he painted. There's a lot David keeps inside. Always the responsible one, always the provider." Benjamin's hand brushed against hers as he reached for his wine glass. The touch lingered a moment too long. Their meetings became more frequent after that night. Benjamin would drop by the gallery with coffee during slow afternoons. He started helping with the accounts when Karen mentioned their accountant had quit. His tech expertise proved invaluable as the gallery shifted further into digital sales. David's calls grew shorter, more distracted. When he did call, Karen found herself mentioning Benjamin less and less. The guilt crept in slowly, disguised as gratitude for Benjamin's help, for his presence, for his understanding. The line was crossed on April 2nd. Another failed video call with David, another bottle of wine with Benjamin. This time, when his hand touched hers, neither pulled away. The kiss that followed felt like falling, terrible and thrilling all at once. "We can't," Karen whispered, but her actions betrayed her words. Benjamin pulled her closer. "We already have." What started as comfort transformed into stolen moments. Rushed kisses in the gallery storage room, lingering embraces in her office, secret meetings disguised as business consultations. Each transgression made the next easier, guilt blurring with desire until Karen could hardly remember why it was wrong. Benjamin was careful, calculating. He made sure they were seen in public acting normally, maintaining the image of caring brother-in-law. But privately, he began suggesting Karen move money between accounts to help with gallery taxes. He asked casual questions about David's schedule, his contracts, his investments. Karen ignored the red flags, lost in the intoxication of feeling wanted, needed, present. Benjamin filled the spaces David had left empty, not just in her bed, but in her daily life. He attended gallery events, remembered small details about her day, brought soup when she felt sick, all the things a husband should do. But beneath the surface, a clock was ticking. David's rotation was ending soon. Benjamin's creditors were calling, and the web of lies they'd woven was about to unravel in ways none of them could have predicted. April 30th was never supposed to be the end. It was supposed to be just another evening of deception. But fate had other plans, and David Ronald was about to come home to a truth that would destroy them all. By mid-April 2021, Karen's initial euphoria over her relationship with Benjamin had begun to fade, replaced by an unsettling awareness of small discrepancies. It started with a call from her gallery's bank, questioning a series of unusual transfers she hadn't authorized. The amounts were significant. $50,000 here, $75,000 there, all moved through accounts she'd given Benjamin access to for tax purposes. When confronted, Benjamin's explanations came too smoothly. "It's just temporary restructuring," he assured her, his familiar smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You know how volatile the art market is right now. I'm protecting your assets." He kissed her worry away, but that night, Karen lay awake, her mind racing through recent events with growing clarity. On April 18th, while Benjamin was at a supposed investor meeting, Karen discovered the first hard evidence that something was terribly wrong. Hidden in his laptop bag, which he'd left at her place, was a stack of documents, loan applications in David's name, transfer authorizations with forged signatures, and most disturbing, a half-packed bag with 2 one-way tickets to Buenos Aires. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. In the following days, Karen began quietly digging into Benjamin's past. What she found shattered any remaining illusions. 3 failed businesses in Toronto, 2 investor lawsuits settled quietly, a string of wealthy women left with empty bank accounts. Benjamin Ronald wasn't just a failed entrepreneur. He was a practiced con man, and she had handed him everything he needed to destroy both her and David. April 23rd brought another shock. The pregnancy test showed positive. Karen sat on the bathroom floor for hours, staring at those 2 blue lines that complicated everything. The baby had to be Benjamin's. David hadn't been home in months. The weight of her choices crashed down around her as she realized the true scope of her predicament. She began gathering evidence, carefully copying documents and recording conversations. Each new discovery revealed the extent of Benjamin's deception. He had systematically drained nearly $800,000 from David's accounts, using Karen's gallery as a front for money laundering. The cryptocurrency venture was a shell designed to fail spectacularly while hiding the stolen funds. On April 28th, Karen made 2 calls. The first was to a lawyer, secretly sharing copies of everything she'd found. The second was to David's satellite phone, leaving a message that she needed to talk urgently. She didn't know that David, already suspicious from irregular account notifications, had started his journey home. April 29th, Benjamin noticed the changed passwords on the gallery accounts. Karen claimed it was an automated security update, but she saw the flash of anger in his eyes. That night, he was rougher than usual, his touch possessive rather than passionate. As they lay in David's bed, Benjamin finally revealed the full scope of his plan. "We're leaving tomorrow," he announced, not asking but telling. "Everything's in place. David will be tied up dealing with the financial mess while we start fresh somewhere else." His hand moved to her stomach, and Karen realized with horror that he knew about the pregnancy. "We'll be a proper family." She forced herself to smile, to play along, knowing she had set things in motion that couldn't be stopped. But Benjamin had miscalculated one crucial detail. David Ronald was already on his way home, his plane touching down in Vancouver late on April 30th. Neither Karen nor Benjamin knew that in less than 24 hours, their web of lies would unravel in a violent confrontation that would leave one brother dead and the other in handcuffs. Karen's plan to expose Benjamin had a fatal flaw. Despite gathering evidence against him, she knew he would destroy everything if he suspected her betrayal. On April 29th, when he grew suspicious about the changed account passwords, she realized she had to maintain the deception for just a little longer, just until she could get all the evidence to her lawyer. "One more day," she told herself that night, forcing herself to accept his touch, to play the role of the devoted lover even as her skin crawled. Just one more day. April 30th, 2021 began like any other day. Benjamin was more possessive than usual, insisting on staying at the house rather than meeting at his apartment. Something in his manner had changed. There was an edge to his charm now, a hint of desperation in his insistence that they'd be leaving Vancouver very soon. By evening, Karen was trapped in a dangerous game. Benjamin had been drinking, growing increasingly paranoid about her changed behavior. When he found her phone in her gallery office and saw the missed call from David, his charming facade cracked completely. "You're not going anywhere," he said, gripping her arm as he forced her into his car. "We're going to go home, and you're going to be very, very convincing tonight. Otherwise, David gets copies of every video I have of us together." How do you think he'd handle that? That's how Karen found herself back in her marital bed at 11:40 p.m., Benjamin's weight pinning her down, trying to delay what he insisted would be their last night in Vancouver. She didn't know David was already in the building. Didn't know he'd come home early, worried by her cryptic message and the irregular bank notifications. The bedroom door crashed open at 11:45 p.m. David stood frozen in the doorway, his world tilting on its axis as he watched his brother scramble off his wife. Karen pulled the sheets around herself, her face a mask of terror and shame. Benjamin, however, showed no shame at all. He stood slowly, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Welcome home, brother. A bit early, aren't you?" David lunged forward, his fist connecting with Benjamin's jaw. The two men crashed into the bedside table, sending the kitchen knife Benjamin had used to threaten Karen earlier clattering to the floor. They grappled violently, years of unspoken resentment fueling each punch. Benjamin's taunts cut deeper than his fists. She needed someone here, David. Someone who could give her more than empty promises and lonely nights. Something snapped in David. His hand found the knife. One moment Benjamin was laughing, the next he was staring in shock at the blade protruding from his chest. The smirk finally fell from his face as he collapsed. Karen's scream pierced the night. She scrambled for her phone, her trembling fingers dialing 911. "Please," she sobbed into the phone. "We need an ambulance. My brother-in-law's been stabbed. Please hurry." Blood pooled on the Turkish carpet as Benjamin's breathing grew ragged. David knelt beside his brother, pressing his hands against the wound. "Stay with me, Benji," he pleaded, using his childhood nickname. "I'm sorry, God. I'm sorry." But Benjamin's eyes were already growing dim. By the time paramedics rushed into the room at 11:55 p.m., he had no pulse. Police officers found David still kneeling in his brother's blood, unresisting as they pulled him to his feet and handcuffed him. Karen had collapsed in the corner, wrapped in a blanket as she watched her husband being led away. "Don't say anything until your lawyer arrives," she called out desperately. "David, please, there's so much you don't know." But David was already being placed in the back of a police car, his white shirt stained red, his world forever changed in the space of 10 minutes. As the car pulled away from the building, camera flashes began popping in the darkness. By morning, the headlines would rock Vancouver's elite society to its core. The morning sunlight cut through Vancouver's fog like a knife, illuminating the crime scene tape that fluttered around the Ronalds' luxury apartment building. News vans cluttered the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers seeking light. The headlines were already spreading across the city. Oil executive murders brother-in-love triangle tragedy. In the building's lobby, Detective Margaret Scott watched security footage for the fourth time, noting how David Ronald's confident stride faltered as he approached his apartment that fateful night. 20 stories above, forensics teams worked methodically through the bedroom where Benjamin's life had ended, photographing blood spatter patterns and collecting evidence that would piece together the violent confrontation. On May 1st, 2021, in Vancouver Police Headquarters, Karen sat in the stark interview room, her designer clothes replaced by borrowed sweats, her usual perfect appearance crumbled. "I need you to understand," she told Detective Scott, her voice raw from hours of talking. "Benjamin was stealing from us, from everyone. I have proof." She surrendered her phone, her laptop, the documents she'd gathered. As she spoke, financial crimes investigators were already uncovering the scope of Benjamin's deception. The cryptocurrency venture had been elaborate smoke and mirrors, designed to hide systematic theft from not just David's accounts, but from dozens of other victims. The evidence painted a damning picture, not of David, but of Benjamin. Bank records showed nearly $2 million siphoned through various accounts. Benjamin had been planning this for years, positioning himself to destroy his brother's life and escape with both his money and his wife. Early May brought the preliminary hearing, where David sat in his prison jumpsuit, unshaven, barely recognizable as the polished executive from his company photos. His lawyer presented Karen's evidence, arguing for a reduction in charges from second-degree murder to manslaughter. The prosecution countered with crime scene photos, the devastating brutality of the moment captured in clinical detail, but it was the medical examiner's testimony that changed everything. The pregnancy test found in the Ronald's bathroom trash was positive, and based on hormone levels and Karen's medical records, conception dated to David's last visit home, not to the affair with Benjamin. The child was David's. Through May and June, Karen struggled to keep the gallery running, but Benjamin's shadow touched everything. Forensic accountants discovered he had used the business accounts to move money, though the gallery itself remained legitimate. Her reputation suffered by association, and the Vancouver art scene, once her refuge, now whispered behind her back. She touched her still flat stomach, wondering how one person's manipulation could destroy so many lives. As summer progressed, David's defense team built their case around temporary insanity and crime of passion. Karen's evidence proved crucial. Text messages showing Benjamin's threats, financial records revealing the grand scheme, security footage from their apartment building showing his increasingly controlling behavior. The prosecution's case weakened as more victims came forward. Benjamin's previous cons were exposed: 3 other galleries in Toronto, 2 investment firms in Calgary, all manipulated and robbed through similar schemes. What happened in the Ronalds' bedroom was the violent end of a long con, not a simple crime of passion. By mid-August, the courtroom fell silent as the jury returned. David stood, shoulders squared, facing his judgment. The verdict: manslaughter. 5 years with possibility of parole in 3. The judge cited the extraordinary circumstances, the clear evidence of prolonged psychological manipulation, and David's spotless prior record. Karen ultimately sold the gallery, using the money to pay back Benjamin's victims. She moved to a smaller apartment, away from the luxury high-rise that held too many dark memories. Every week, she drove to the prison for visitation, her growing belly a reminder of both what was lost and what remained. David started painting again in prison, his therapist's suggestion for processing trauma. His first work, a stormy seascape, dark waves crashing against a distant lighthouse. He titled it Betrayal's Wake. The Ronald family fortune was gone, drained by legal fees and restitution payments. But something else emerged from the ashes of their former life: truth. Hard, painful truth that forced both David and Karen to confront their own roles in the tragedy. His absences, her loneliness, the small compromises that created space for Benjamin's manipulation. On a cold December afternoon, Karen sat in the prison visitation room, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Across the table, David's eyes were clear, the anger replaced by something deeper. Understanding, perhaps, or acceptance. "I felt her kick yesterday," Karen said softly. David's hand trembled as she guided it to her stomach. Their daughter moved, a strong kick against his palm. "I've been thinking about names," he said. "Not Benjamin, if it's a boy," Karen attempted a weak joke. David's smile was sad but genuine. "Hope," he said, "if it's a girl, because that's what we need now." In the end, their story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the complicated nature of forgiveness, the price of ambition, and the painful truth that sometimes the deepest wounds come from those closest to us. The Ronald family's perfect facade had shattered, but in its place, something real began to grow, built not on appearances or expectations, but on the hard-won wisdom of those who have lost everything and found the courage to begin again. The Vancouver papers eventually moved on to other scandals, other tragedies. But in a prison art therapy room, on a canvas streaked with blues and grays, David continued to paint his way through the darkness, searching for light.